Okay, picture this. You're in 18th century France, this remote, snow-swept region. And there's this creature right out of a nightmare.
Yeah, not just a wolf, something else, something bigger, smarter, and just relentlessly brutal.
Leaving behind this trail of, well, utter devastation, over 100 people killed, mauled in these horrific ways.
And the central question, the one that still haunts us, is, was it some monstrous animal, maybe a pack of rabid wolves?
Or was it something much darker? Like human evil hiding behind the idea of a beast.
Exactly. And that mystery is La Bête du Gévaudan, the Beast of Gévaudan, one of history's most, well, genuinely terrifying puzzles.
And that is what we're diving deep into today. We've gathered a whole stack of your sources, historical accounts from the time, modern analyses, psychological takes.
All sorts of material. And our mission today is really to pull out the key insights from all this. We're zeroing in on that core debate, man or beast.
What do the sources tell us about the story itself, the descriptions, and crucially the psychology?
Yeah.
Both of the community living in terror.
And perhaps more chillingly, what kind of mind could possibly be behind it if humans were involved? Exploring those potential psychological profiles.
Okay, let's get into it. To really understand the terror, we need the context. Where and when did all this happen? Set the scene for us.
We're talking about the former province of Gévaudan, south-central France. If you look on a map today, it's mostly the Lozère department.
Oh, yeah.
And you need to picture it back then, mid-18th century, rugged, isolated, lots of forests, high plateaus, rocky ground, not densely populated like Paris, you know.
Real wilderness, basically.
Very much so. And crucially, it was wolf country. People knew wolves were around, feared them, but this was different.
And the timeline. When did this nightmare really take hold?
Well, the main period, the really intense wave of this specific brutal attacks, the ones that got everyone's attention, caused mass panic that was from June 1764 right through to June 1767.
3 solid years.
3 years of terror. Now, the sources do mention some, maybe less severe attacks before that window and a few afterwards, too. But those 3 years, 64 to 67, that's when Gévaudan became infamous.
And the victims, who was this thing targeting?
That's one of the most tragic parts. The numbers, well, they vary a bit in the sources. Record keeping wasn't perfect, obviously. But the estimates are consistently grim. Around 80 killed, maybe over 100. And many, many more injured, often horribly.
God. And who were they?
Overwhelmingly, women and children.
Really? Not soldiers or hunters?
No, that's what's so striking. The accounts constantly talk about young shepherds, shepherdesses, kids, basically, out alone or in small groups in remote pastures, watching livestock.
Vulnerable.
Exactly. Adult men were attacked sometimes, but much less often. And significantly, when they were much more likely to survive. They could fight back, use tools, weapons maybe.
So it seemed to pick the easiest targets.
It certainly looks that way. The isolation and vulnerability of women and children in those pastures made them the primary focus.
And the attacks themselves, I mean, the descriptions are just horrific. What do the sources say about how it killed?
Savage. That's the word that comes up again and again. Extreme brutality. It wasn't just killing, it was mauling. Savagely.
Oh, so.
The injuries described are consistently focused on the upper body. Head, face, neck, chest. And a detail that's repeated, chillingly, is throats being torn out. Yeah. It wasn't a clean kill. The scenes described were ones of just, profound violence and mutilation.
Was it eating the victims, like a predator would?
Sometimes. The sources say there was partial consumption in many cases. Bits were eaten. But, and this is another odd detail, it didn't always seem to eat much or finish the kill like a hungry wolf typically would.
So not just about hunger, then?
That's what some people wondered, both then and now. Did it kill for reasons other than just hunger? Was the act of killing itself the point? Or part of some, ritual? It definitely raised questions.
Okay, and this next point, you mentioned it's in the sources.
Yeah.
This is where the simple big wolf idea really starts to wobble for some people. It often ignored nearby animals.
Absolutely, and this is probably one of the most unsettling details that crops up constantly. The beast would apparently walk right past cattle, sheep, goats, easy prey, right there.
Yeah, much easier than a person.
Right. But it would ignore them and specifically attack the human, usually the woman or child tending them. From a purely predatory standpoint, driven by hunger, that makes very little sense. It's inefficient, risky.
That is weird.
It's highly atypical animal behavior. And that detail, maybe more than any other, really fueled the suspicion that something else was going on here, something not quite natural.
And it wasn't just brutal, it was smart. The sources talk about its cunning.
Oh, yeah. Despite the ferocity, it showed this uncanny knack for avoiding capture. You had huge hunts organized hundreds of local men, later royal soldiers armed with muskets, spears. They'd sweep the forests, set traps, lay ambushes. But the beast just seemed to vanish, melt away, bypass the traps. It was almost never successfully cornered by these big groups. It suggested a level of intelligence, or maybe instinct, that felt, well, unusual for a wild animal, like it could outwit them.
So we've got this picture emerging. Huge, terrifyingly violent, kills humans instead of sheep, and it's incredibly slippery. What did people who actually saw it say it looked like?
Well, that's where it gets really complicated. And messy, frankly.
How so? Contradictory reports.
Totally. Loads of eyewitness accounts from survivors or people who saw it at a distance, but they often didn't match up. You have to remember, these people were terrified. Many were rural folk, maybe not used to describing things precisely under duress.
And fear changes what you see, right?
Massively. Fear plus existing folklore about monsters, werewolves, it all gets mixed up, so the descriptions are filtered through that lens. We end up with this composite picture, but it's full of contradictions.
But were there any common threads, things people generally agreed on?
Yes, definitely some recurring features, even with the variations. Size was almost always mentioned, much bigger than a normal wolf. People compared it to a calf, sometimes even a young cow.
That's huge for a wolf.
Exactly. The fur was often described as reddish-brown, or maybe grayish-red, sometimes shaggy, and many mentioned a dark stripe down its back.
Okay, what about the head?
Large head. Wolf-like, generally, but some accounts mention dog-like features, too. Long snout, powerful jaws, really noticeable big teeth, broad chest, powerful build, large paws with big claws.
And the tail. You mentioned that was odd.
Yeah, the tail comes up surprisingly often. Described as long, maybe tufted or bushy, and sometimes witnesses noted it was very mobile, which isn't typical for a wolf's tail, usually stiffer, shorter.
Any really weird descriptions?
Oh, yeah. Amidst the more plausible stuff, you get reports like, it could rear up and walk on its hind legs.
Seriously?
Well, that's what was claimed, almost certainly just pure terror talking, right? Trying to describe something that felt monstrous, fitting into those folklore boxes, but it shows the level of fear.
Living through that level of just unpredictable, savage violence, the psychological impact must have been immense. How did the community react?
Oh, profound is probably an understatement. Devastating. We're talking widespread mass hysteria.
Yeah.
A deep, paralyzing terror gripped Gévaudan for 3 solid years.
Must have shut everything down.
Pretty much. Daily life got severely disrupted. People were terrified to work the fields, send kids out with the animals, even travel the paths between villages. Normal life just ground to a halt in many places.
So what did the authorities do initially?
Well, first it was local nobles, local officials. They organized these big hunts, sometimes hundreds of armed men, offered local rewards. But like we said, the beast was just too elusive. These early efforts didn't really work. But the sheer number of killings, the duration, it became more than a local problem. It became a national issue, and frankly, a huge embarrassment for King Louis XV. Think about it. The absolute monarch of France, supposedly all-powerful, can't protect his own subjects from an animal. It was a blow to the crown's prestige, especially in the Age of Enlightenment when they're trying to project reason and order.
So the king had to get involved.
He did. Realizing how bad it looked, Louis XV sent in the professionals. First, famous wolf hunters, guys like Denneval, known for clearing wolves from royal forests.
Did they get it?
Nope. Even they failed. So the king escalated. He sent his own personal arquebus bearer, basically his top gunman and hunter from the royal court, a man named Francois Antoine.
Okay, serious firepower now.
Yeah, Antoine came with backup, too. Detachments of dragoons, royal soldiers to conduct the hunt like a military operation.
And bigger rewards, too, I imagine.
Oh, yes. Significant bounties were offered, not just by the king, but others, too. Huge sums for the time. Trying to really incentivize anyone to kill this thing.
Now, the history books mention a couple of famous kills that were supposed to be the end of it. The first one was by the king's guy, Antoine.
That's right. September 1765, so over a year into the worst of it. Francois Antoine kills this huge gray wolf near an abbey, the Abbé des Chats. Massive animal.
And he thought that was it.
Absolutely convinced. He had it skinned, stuffed, sent back to Versailles, presented to the king. Problem solved. Antoine was hailed as a hero. And for a short time, maybe a couple of months, the attacks did seem to decrease or even stop in some areas.
But seemed to. It wasn't the end.
Heartbreakingly, no. After that lull, the attacks started up again. Same horror, same savagery, same targeting.
Wow. So Antoine's wolf wasn't the beast. Or not the only one.
Exactly. It proved that either he'd killed a large, dangerous wolf, but not the beast, or perhaps there was more than one creature involved. The nightmare continued.
So when did it finally stop? There was a second famous kill, right?
Yes, almost 2 years later, June 19th, 1767. This time it wasn't a royal agent, but a local man, Jean Chastel, a farmer, hunter. He shot and killed another large, strange-looking wolf on Mount Mouchet.
Strange-looking how?
Accounts mention peculiar features, again, different from a normal wolf, reinforcing that idea of something unusual. And crucially, after this kill, the major attacks that had terrified the region for 3 years finally, largely, stopped.
And Chastel. Isn't there some folklore about him? Silver bullets.
Yes. That's where you really see the local beliefs bleeding into the story. The tale, probably legend but very persistent, is that Chastel used silver bullets he'd cast himself and had blessed by a priest.
Straight out of werewolf lore.
Exactly. It shows how deeply intertwined the real terror was with these supernatural beliefs. For many locals, this wasn't just a wolf, it needed a special kind of response.
What happened to the animal Chastel killed? Did that one go to the king too?
That was the plan, but the journey to Versailles was long, it was hot, and apparently the carcass decomposed badly on the way, poor preservation, so it never really arrived in a state to be properly examined or displayed.
But the attack stopped.
The major ones did, yes. The timing was right. So especially in local memory, Chastel's kill is the one credited with finally ending the main terror, even if the proof sort of rotted away.
Okay, so that whole narrative, the attacks, the fear, the failed hunts, the royal involvement, these two key kills, it brings us right to the core mystery, doesn't it? The man or monster debate. Let's tackle the monster side first. The arguments for it being purely an animal.
Right. The animal-only theory. This is often seen as the simplest explanation, the most parsimonious one, favored by many modern scientists looking for a natural cause.
And the thinking is?
The core idea is that this was one or more unusually large or aggressive or maybe rabid canines. We know Gévaudan was wolf territory. So the presence of wolves isn't the question. It's whether wolf behavior, maybe under specific pressures, could explain this level of violence and weirdness.
So what are the main animal theories?
Well, the most straightforward is just an exceptionally large, bold wolf, or maybe a pack. Perhaps starving, perhaps their usual prey was scarce, maybe they lost their fear of humans somehow. Rabies is sometimes mentioned, but a rabid animal usually doesn't last 3 years, So maybe just a naturally very aggressive, large specimen, or a pack that developed a taste for human prey. Then there's the exotic animal theory. Did something escape from a private zoo, a menagerie?
Like what? A lion?
Maybe, or a hyena is often suggested. Hyenas have incredibly powerful jaws, they look a bit wolf-like from afar, and their scavenging might explain the partial eating.
Plausible.
The problem is, importing animals like that was super rare and expensive in 18th century France, and there's just no actual record, no evidence of any such animal escaping near Gévaudan then. It fits some characteristics, but it's pure speculation, really.
What about a hybrid wolf-dog?
Yeah, that's another one. The idea is a hybrid might mix wolf size and strength with a dog's lower fear of humans. That could explain the boldness, maybe the varied appearance.
Any proof?
Again, not really. There have been some modern attempts to study supposed relics of the beast, but the results are inconclusive, and whether the relics are even genuine is debatable. So, possible, zoologically, but not proven for this case. And then there's a really important factor, misidentification fueled by mass hysteria.
You mean people were so scared they just saw a monster?
Basically, yes. Imagine the terror. Brutal attacks by something big and toothy. In a pre-scientific society steeped in werewolf legends, it's totally plausible that any large canada responsible would get described with exaggerated, monstrous features. Fear genuinely distorts perception. People might honestly believe they saw something supernatural because that fit their worldview of such horror.
Okay, so those are the main arguments for monster meaning animal. Unusual wolf, escaped exotic, hybrid, or just mass hysteria magnifying a normal predator.
Yeah.
Now let's turn to the darker side. The arguments for man, human involvement.
Right. This is where the story shifts from natural history mystery to potentially something much more sinister. This angle explores the chilling idea that this was orchestrated, human evil at work.
And the arguments for this usually focus on the stuff that just doesn't fit normal animal behavior, right?
Exactly. It's the anomalies, the weirdness that makes people lean this way.
Like what specifically? What behaviors scream not an animal to some?
Well, top of the list, as we discussed, is targeting humans over livestock. That repeated pattern of ignoring easy prey to go for people, it just feels intentional, not instinctual, to proponents of this theory. Like the goal was killing humans. Then there's the cunning, the way it evaded massive hunts, sophisticated traps, military forces. It seemed to show a strategic thinking, an ability to anticipate and counter human efforts that felt more like human intelligence guiding it or being it.
And avoiding poison bait.
Yeah, that's another one mentioned in some sources. Reports claimed it wouldn't touch poisoned carcasses left out for it, which most hungry predators would fall for. Again, suggesting an intelligence animal or human that recognized the danger. And then, more controversially, there are these few contemporary accounts hinting the wounds sometimes looked off. Too clean, maybe, like a blade was used alongside bites.
But that could just be misinterpretation, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Highly likely, given the trauma and lack of forensic knowledge. But at the time, those descriptions added fuel to the fire, making some wonder if it wasn't purely animalistic tearing.
Okay, so the beast's behavior raised questions. But were there actual people suspected at the time?
Yes. Inevitably, in a terrified community, suspicion falls on locals. People seen as outsiders, recluses, anyone a bit strange. And the sources consistently point towards one family in particular, the Chastels.
The family of Jean Chastel, the guy who eventually killed the second beast.
The very same. Jean himself had a bit of a strange reputation, apparently. And there were rumors about his sons being odd, maybe training animals in weird ways, keeping strange creatures, whispers, you know? And the timing of Jean's kill adds to the suspicion for some. He was actually in prison for a bit, right before he killed the beast. And reports suggest the attacks lessened while he was locked up, then maybe briefly resumed when he got out, just before he made the kill.
Coincidence. Or something more.
Exactly. Could be nothing. Or the darker theories suggest maybe he was involved, maybe his kill was staged to end the whole thing, perhaps sacrificing one of his own animals to stop the scrutiny.
And one son, Antoine, is often singled out, isn't he?
Antoine de Chastel, yes. He becomes a central figure in many human involvement theories. Rumors claimed he kept exotic animals, maybe big dogs, maybe wolf hybrids, on their remote farm. He had a reputation for being very reclusive. Strange.
So the theory is he trained animals to attack.
That's one main theory. That Antoine was a sadist who trained large dogs, mastiffs, maybe wolf dogs, possibly fitting them with armor or sharpened teeth to carry out the attacks. An even darker version suggests Antoine was the killer, maybe using an animal as cover, committing serial murders under the guise of the beast.
Right. Let's go there. If we entertain that possibility, human evil behind this, what kind of mind are we talking about? Purely speculatively, based on the described actions.
Okay, and yeah, heavy emphasis on speculative. We're just applying psychological concepts to the reported behaviors, not claiming proof.
Yeah.
But if human was doing this...
Scenario 1. The lone serial killer using the beast as cover. What drives that?
Profound sadism seems almost certain. The extreme brutality, the mutilation, the focus on terror that suggests someone getting intense psychological pleasure, maybe even sexual gratification from causing suffering and death. The maulings, the throat ripping, could be part of a sadistic ritual.
And they'd have to be smart.
Incredibly so. To pull off possibly over 100 murders over years, disguised as animal attacks while dodging massive hunts, that requires extreme cunning, planning, adaptability, not random violence, and deception. They'd need to be a master manipulator living normally in the community, maybe even expressing fear of the beast while being its creator. Maintaining that facade takes skill.
Any specific psychological kinks, maybe? Beyond just sadism.
Some interpretations of the sources wonder about that. Maybe a fascination with animalistic violence itself, a specific bloodlust. Or maybe the beast persona was key to their fantasy, a kind of twisted zoophilia expressed through violence. Hard to say, but possible. You'd also likely see grandiose narcissism, successfully terrorizing a whole region, outwitting the king's men, that would feed an immense sense of power, of being superior above everyone else. And underneath it all, psychopathy, a total lack of empathy or remorse. Victims are just objects for their gratification, no guilt. They might also need some practical knowledge anatomy, maybe to inflict specific wounds or animal behavior to make the cover convincing.
So the motive is pure psychological gratification, amplified by the terror.
Largely, yes. Power, control, sadistic pleasure. The beast's story is the perfect tool and cover.
Okay, what about scenario 2? Someone like Antoine Chastel, training animals. What's the psychology there?
Still deeply sadistic, even if it's vicarious. Orchestrating those attacks, commanding animals to kill and maim people, you'd still get immense pleasure from the suffering you cause indirectly. And it requires incredible skill and cruelty in animal training. We're not talking about teaching a dog to sit. This is training large, dangerous animals to be aggressive killers of humans on command. That takes a specific, dark kind of expertise and dedication. The motive here might lean more towards dominance and power. Controlling these beasts, unleashing them on the community. That's an immense feeling of power, being a master of life and death. And again, huge cunning and secrecy needed. Training killer animals, deploying them for years without getting caught. Requires meticulous planning.
And targeting women and children in this scenario.
Could be specific hatred, misogyny, pedophilia, or just pragmatism. They were the easiest targets for the trained animals in isolated spots. So, motive here. Mix of vicarious sadism, desire for power through animal control, maybe a grudge. The chaos itself is the reward.
Are there common traits needed for either human scenario?
Definitely. High organization is key for a 3-year campaign. Planning, coordination, the ability to live a double life, blending in while being the monster. Essential. Massive risk-taking, you're constantly hunted. Suggest someone who thrives on danger or has little self-preservation when the urges hit, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Gévaudan's forests, paths, hiding spots, crucial for operating and evading capture.
The sources also mentioned maybe it wasn't one person, but a group, like a family.
Yes, that's another layer. Could be a small group. The Chastels are the obvious example theory. Maybe a shared madness, a folie à plusieurs. Shared psychopathology, maybe a dominant leader influencing others. Secrecy and loyalty would be absolute, bound by their terrible secret.
Okay, shifting focus from the potential perpetrator.
Yeah.
What about the community? Living under this for 3 years, the psychological impact must have been collective, right?
Oh, absolutely devastating. It's hard to even imagine living with that constant, specific, brutal threat hanging over you. Not just danger, but this specific horror. It's the perfect breeding ground for mass fear, mass hysteria, which, as we said, easily leads to exaggerated accounts, believing in werewolves, demons, divine punishment. It also tragically leads to scapegoating, blaming outsiders or anyone different.
A traumatized region.
Deeply. That kind of sustained terror leaves collective scars woven into folklore, passed down generations, a shared memory of horror. It also destroys trust. If the predator is unknown, could it be your neighbor? Suspicion festers.
Some people just want it to end, right?
Desperately. After years of fear, you crave closure. Any plausible solution like Antoine's wolf or later Chastel's might be readily accepted, even with lingering doubts. The need for the nightmare to be over can trump the need for absolute certainty.
Let's layer in some other details from the sources that add complexity. The role of superstition seems massive.
Huge. We talked about the silver bullets. But you have to understand, in 18th century rural France, werewolves, demons, God's wrath, these weren't fringe beliefs. They were real explanations for the inexplicable. So when an animal acts strangely, violently, supernaturally cunning, it fits right into that framework. It shapes how the beast is seen and described from the start.
And the victims, again, women and children. We covered vulnerability, but if it was human?
If human, the targeting becomes potentially symbolic, right? As the sources suggest, maybe it's about misogyny, pedophilia, or a deliberate attack on the heart of the community, its future, its perceived weakness, to maximize psychological damage. Either way, targeting the most defenseless created this unique layer of horror, shattering families and the community's sense of basic safety.
And the political side, the embarrassment for the king.
Very significant. It highlighted the limits of royal power. Louis V couldn't protect his people. In the Enlightenment era, that's bad PR. The escalating response hunters, troops, Antoine shows how seriously Versailles took the threat to its own authority and image. There might have also been friction. Locals versus Paris officials, maybe. Locals knowing the land, maybe suspecting neighbors, while royal agents seem out of touch. That dynamic is hinted at, plus the economic hit. People scared to farm, graze animals. It disrupts everything, adds pressure.
And the investigation itself, comparing it to now, is stark, isn't it?
Night and day. No DNA, no ballistics, no real crime scene analysis. Evidence was eyewitness accounts warped by fear, maybe some tracks, looking at decomposed bodies. That's it. And information spread by word of mouth, local papers, official reports, all prone to distortion. No central scientific analysis like today. Just a desperate, chaotic search based on fear and limited tools.
Let's circle back quickly to the Chastels, especially Antoine. He really is the focal point for the human theories.
He is. The rumors about his reclusive nature, the strange animals, it all feeds that narrative. Was he training wolf dogs? Mastiffs. Experimenting. That's the core speculation.
And his father Jean's role in the darker theories.
Yeah, was Jean just a lucky hero? Or was he complicit, maybe covering for Antoine? Did he sacrifice one of Antoine's creations to end the scrutiny? We'll likely never know, but it's a persistent dark thread in the lore, stemming from that strange timing around his imprisonment and the kill.
And the stuff wolves sent to court. Well, what's the significance there?
It's about symbolism and politics. Presenting the dead wolf to the king wasn't about science, it was a trophy. Tangible proof the monster was dead, order restored. It reassured the public and salvaged the crown's image. A necessary political act.
Have modern studies offered any definitive answers? Zoology. Criminology.
Zoology helps understand wolf behavior better, highlighting how unusual the Gévaudan attacks seem, even for stressed wolves. Criminology provides profiles of serial offenders, sadism, organization, deception that could theoretically fit a human perpetrator, offering a framework if you go down that path, but without new evidence. It's all overlaying modern ideas onto incomplete, biased historical data. And today, the story is still huge in Gévaudan. Part local history, part dark legend, part tourist attraction. It's deeply embedded there.
So let's try and sum up this deep dive. La Bête du Gévaudan. 3 years of horror, over 100 dead. A terrifying creature, incredibly violent, cunning, strangely selective.
And the big question remains, was it just an animal? A freakishly large wolf, a pack, something escaped, maybe magnified by hysteria?
Or was it human evil? Someone training animals or even committing the murders themselves hidden behind the monster myth?
We know the attacks happened. We know the terror was real and widespread, reaching the king himself. We know large Kennies were killed, and the main terror ended around 1767.
But the final, certain answer, still elusive, lost to time, fear, and folklore.
And maybe that's why the story still grips us, isn't it? That ambiguity. It taps into primal fears, the monster in the woods, the fragility of life.
And maybe the most unsettling fear of all, the idea that human cruelty can be just as savage, just as monstrous as any beast. Perhaps even more terrifying because it's calculated.
Does the mystery linger because we can't quite grasp the animal, or because the possibility of a human monster is just too chilling to fully comprehend?
Something to think about. What do you think really happened in Gévaudan?